Hi, Don.
Hi.
One of the first questions would be, what out of everything that you have done, what has become your favorite out of all your work?
Of all my work would definitely be the novel, The Space Between.
Could you tell us a little bit about that?
It's one of the reasons, I guess, is because the author's narrator, Jace, is more like me when I was 18 than any other character I've written before. And it's also a subject very close to my heart. 3 people close to me during my lifetime had taken their own lives, and so this is a novel about a young man whose older brother had killed himself, and he hasn't yet come to terms with that. So it's a very special subject.
Earlier today we were talking about your bestseller, The First Stone. Could you tell us a little bit about that book?
It's about a young man who, at 17 years of age, is already he's a horrible human being. He's done terrible things, and at the beginning of the novel, he ends up becoming upset about something. So he finds a rock, goes to an overpass, picks out an oncoming car, throws the rock into a windshield, and nearly kills the driver. And from that point on, the novel deals with the repercussions of his actions.
It's very interesting. I look forward to reading that.
Thank you.
You're a writer, right? So you're constantly writing. But out of your work, who do you think would be your favorite author? Do you have a favorite author?
It's funny, I do have favorite authors, but they change when I come upon other authors. But I would say that one writer, I'll mention 2. One of my favorite novels that I've ever read my entire lifetime was To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. It was the very first novel I had read when I was a teenager that I felt I was a different human being after having read it. I felt it had changed me. And a writer that I would say has been influential in my own writing would be Robert Cormier, who himself was a young adult writer. And his books were the very first novels I'd ever read about teenagers who didn't varnish them into something unbelievable, who actually, he showed what life could be like and what it often was like for teenagers, particularly troubled teenagers, or teenagers who suffered some kind of problem that impacted their entire lives. So I think actually it was because of Robert Cormier that I chose to write realistic fiction, because I think he's one of the very best writers of that genre.
You talked about authors that have inspired you.
Yeah.
What about people in your life, whether personally or professionally?
Oh, absolutely. I think that, certainly my parents inspired me. They faced a number of challenges early and later in their lives, and always surmounted them. I would say one of my very best friends, Frank Pecora, was a teacher who devoted his career to saving the lives of teenagers who might have slipped through the cracks. He was very devoted to social justice, and so he actually is the model for one of the characters in my novel, The First Stone. But I would also say that many of my students have inspired me. Every novel I've ever written was inspired by either a student I had or a young person that I had met. When we think about the kinds of troubles that there are out there that we sort of, we complain, one day to the next, this is terrible or that's terrible, but there are many young people who are living with things that are far worse and yet still manage to bring themselves to school. I know of a family, or I've heard, I should say, of a family in my area that keeps a chain wrapped around the refrigerator because they can only afford to eat every other day. And so that chain, lock and chain, is there to keep, that's the kind of thing that when people can actually rise above that, that's amazing. So yeah, I would say that young people are certainly among my greatest inspirations.
One of my last questions now would be, how do you come across the inspirations for your novels? How do you come up with the little details? that you put in the novels?
I'm a listener and an observer. I think that my very most important writing tool is my writer's notebook. If I see something that for some reason just catches my interest, it's out of the ordinary, I might be able to use that. For example, I can remember listening in on a conversation in a school not long ago, three young women chatting about something, and their bodies were very animated, and as I was walking by, I sort of eavesdropped a little bit on what they were saying, and one of those young women said to the other two a comment. They were talking about a fourth girl who wasn't there, and they were being unkind. And this one girl said to the other two, her eyebrows looked like skid marks. And the moment I heard that, I thought it was so vicious. It's such a vicious comment, but then I thought, wow, that's a great line. And so I jotted in my writer's notebook, and it actually is in my most recent novel, Delusion Road. So I think imagination is of really much less importance to me as a writer than the ability to observe, to listen, and to note those kinds of things that I might be able to use in my writing.
Okay.
I heard your presentation more about the writing process and how you come up with your novels. How would you describe your writing process?
My writing process really begins with three questions. The first question is always going to be, who is my story going to be about? Because stories are always about characters and how characters are affected by events, not by the events themselves. So once I create this character, I spend a lot of time getting to know my character, inventing details until I can actually see that person as a human being. And then I answer the second question, which is, what does my character want more than anything? Because all stories are about characters who want something, whether it's a real tangible item or whether it's something intangible. All stories are about that. So once I know my character really well, and I can answer that question, and by the way, if I can't answer that question, what do they want more than anything, then I know that I haven't fully developed that character sufficiently anyway. So I have answered the who, and I've answered what do they want more than anything. I answered the third question, which is, how can I keep them from getting it? And that's my job, to at least prevent my character from getting what it is he or she wants for a little while, if not forever. And once I've got the answers to those three questions, I start with my first sentence, and then I write my second sentence and go to the end of the novel. I don't plan out my stories in advance. What keeps me going through hundreds of pages of a manuscript is I want to find out how it ends.
That's interesting. Well, you write most of your novels and your stories are always about teenagers, or always involves teenage life in some sort of way. Why do you think you write about teenagers, even though you are an adult and probably know more about the adult life?
Well, that's an excellent question. And has either of you ever heard someone say to you, these are the best years of your life right now?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
it's a lie. It's an absolute lie. These are not the best years of your life. They're the hardest years of your life. They're the most difficult, the most challenging. You go through more changes. You go through more conflict, I think, in this part of your life, because you're beginning to understand who you are. You're beginning to develop a sense of your place around other people. You're becoming the human being you will be the rest of your life. I can't imagine any period of life that'd be more interesting to write about. And because obviously I taught teenagers for 33 years, I was always immersed in that. And I guess to some extent I'm still working out my own issues when I was a teenager. Yeah, I think it's fascinating. I don't think there could be any other period of life that'd be better to write about.
My last question for you is, do you have any writing tips that you would like to give any students here at Heritage that want to pursue in writing?
First of all, be a reader. Make sure that you read the kinds of things that you want to write. Just as a carpenter learns the craft by working alongside a trained, expert, a professional, a reader is learning how to tell the kinds of stories that they most enjoy themselves. So reading, absolutely. The second thing would be to keep a writer's notebook, to jot down those kinds of ideas and details that might ordinarily be lost that you could be using in your writing at some point. I would think that the third thing would be to join a writers group or to create a writers group, which would give you an opportunity and a reason to not only to produce something but have an audience to share it with who can give you feedback on that. And the fourth thing would be, I guess, to learn how to handle rejection. Because that's part and parcel of what every writer's career involves, at least initially.
Thank you very much for talking with us.
You're very welcome.
I have one last question for you. Just to close everything up.
Yeah?
I understand that writing takes a huge part in your life. Every single moment you live, you take that and you use that in your writing, or you use your writing in every single moment that you live.
Mm-hmm.
If you weren't writing, what do you see yourself doing? Maybe a hobby?
I guess I would be a professional eavesdropper. Honestly, I love listening and watching and observing people. And it's funny, when my wife and I are out somewhere, might be at out to a restaurant or something, and she can often tell when my eyes are glazing over when I'm not actually paying attention to her, but I'm listening to the conversation next to me. I find human beings fascinating, and yeah, so I think that if I weren't a writer, I'd still be listening and watching and taking notes of what I see.
That is extremely interesting.
I hope it doesn't sound creepy.
Oh, no. Okay, so that's all the time we have for today. This was Don Aker at Heritage Regional High School. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Listening to you was completely inspiring.
Mara was on the phone for hours making sure everyone knew what not to wear to the funeral home and the church. Someone asked her, wouldn't it just be easier to keep Lucas home? Mara never told us her reply, but I could fill in the blanks myself. Mara isn't one to mince words. So despite another skiff of snow that had fallen before the funeral, the cemetery was filled with blues and yellows and pinks and greens the day we buried my brother. We looked like human Easter eggs huddled beside the open grave, and I hoped Stefan could see us. Hoped he was looking down from wherever he'd chosen to go and was enjoying the spectacle. And I prayed that no one would learn the part I'd played in his death, that I'd practically loaded the rifle, given him the bullet that tore the brain from his skull.
That's very intense.
It was very intense. It definitely gives us a little curiosity to read the book.
I hope so.
It really does. Why did you choose that line? Why that line?
It just came. It just came. There are a lot of scenes where I'll write that afterwards I have to rework and make sure they fit and make sure that, and I'll cut and I'll change and reorder and so on. But that was one of the very few scenes I've written in my lifetime that I made no change to. It seemed right the first time.